Welcome to VSOW. Today we're doing a really rigorous deep dive into a concept that's, well, it's kind of everywhere, but often hard to pin down. We're talking about the commodified self. It's this whole exploration of how our most private things, our feelings, our time, our identities are being, systematically packaged and sold in the digital marketplace.
Yeah, and it's a complex area because it really sits at this intersection, doesn't it? You've got philosophy, critical theory, but also just the reality of how we live now. The sources we're digging into today are pretty serious. We're drawing on core critical thinkers, people like Marx, Herbert Marcuse, but also, and this is key, deep ethnographic research looking directly at, say, digital influencers and how this plays out for them. So that combination lets us go beyond just, defining terms. We can actually dissect the hidden ways exploitation gets built into platforms that seem free or into this pressure for personal branding.
Right. And the core dilemma we really want to unpack for you, the listener, is this tension. On one hand, there's this maybe utopian idea of online sharing, building communities. But on the other hand, there's the cold reality of corporate monetization and this almost compulsory drive towards constantly selling ourselves, exploiting ourselves even. So the big question isn't just if we're being sold, but how the whole structure of the digital economy kind of forces us to become our own marketers, sometimes pretty ruthless ones.
Exactly. So the plan is to tackle this head on. First, we'll lay out the philosophical groundwork, sort of how the self even became ready for this kind of commodification. Then we'll analyze how these digital platforms actually work as some call social factories, places where value is extracted. And finally, we'll look at the impact, the psychological toll, the creative costs. This whole process takes on our sense of, well, authenticity.
Okay, so let's start there, defining the territory. This term, commodification of self, it sounds academic, but the effects are very real, right?
Yeah.
What are the key components our sources identify?
Well, Joseph E. Davis, a sociologist, gives us a really helpful framework. He breaks it down into two main interconnected parts. The first one has historical roots. It's that our self-understanding gets mediated by consumption. What that means is we tend to define our real self less through fixed roles, like being a teacher or a parent, and more through the images tied to commodities, the things we buy.
So it's not just about needing a car, it's about buying a certain car to project a specific identity.
Yeah.
Like, I drive this, therefore I am. That kind of thing.
Precisely. The objects become tools for self-definition, instruments of maybe liberation or expressing who we really are. We buy things to be someone. And the second component, this one feels maybe even more relevant today, especially online. It's the reorganizing of life on the model of market relations.
Okay, unpack that a bit.
This is where personal branding stops being just a business tactic and becomes almost a way of life. We start applying market logic to our personal lives, our relationships, even how we think about ourselves. We're constantly optimizing, positioning, essentially treating ourselves like a product that needs constant updates and marketing.
And this wasn't an overnight shift. You mentioned historical roots. Our sources point to work by Ralph Turner, discussing a big change in how we even conceived of the self. How did that happen?
Right. Turner identified this major shift, especially accelerating after World War II. Before that, identity was primarily anchored in institutional roles. You knew who you were based on your job, your family position, your role in the community church, things like that. These roles came with clear expectations, a sense of place.
But then the focus moved inward, towards what he called inner criteria or impulse.
Exactly. There was this growing emphasis on finding the authentic, the unsocialized self, the spontaneous feeling inside separate from those potentially stifling social roles. But here's the irony, and it's a huge one that the sources keep coming back to.
Okay.
This very search for an authentic inner self created a kind of normative vacuum. Society stopped giving clear instructions on who to be, and guess who rushed in?
Mass marketers.
Precisely. They stepped right into that void, selling products and services as the means to achieve that authentic liberation. Buy this, use this service, and you'll find the real you. It's a powerful pitch.
And that vacuum seems like the perfect breeding ground for personal branding. This idea pushed by people like Tom Peters of Me, Inc.
Oh, Peters absolutely made it feel mandatory. His message was clear. Your most important job is being the head marketer for the brand called you. Success, whether economic or just social relevance, started depending on consciously crafting everything, your skills, personality traits, he called them the selling parts, your achievements into this really focused image. It wasn't enough just to be good at something. The packaging became paramount. You had to distill yourself down into something simple, recognizable, like a logo.
Like the Nike swoosh or Calvin Klein's aesthetic, but for a person.
Exactly that. And the implication is huge. If you are a brand, you constantly have to monitor it, adjust it, make sure it stays relevant.
Yeah.
You have to be ready to reinvent your brand regularly, just like a company would.
Which leads directly to this pressure. Alan Rojas Shiokolka talks about the constant need to optimize.
Yes, and this is where it gets really insidious, according to the sources. Once you buy into the Me Inc. logic, self-improvement isn't just personal growth anymore. It's relentless optimization. The goal isn't just competence, it's continuous improvement measured against external standards. So you feel this need for courses, gadgets, coaches, tracking apps.
It sounds completely exhausting, like
Yeah.
you're always falling short.
It is. It's like being on a treadmill where every step just reveals the next flaw you need to fix. The sources describe this leading to feelings of emptiness, fragmentation. You're performing a self, not living it. There's this constant monitoring, adjusting. Mark Carantee warns about this, the risk of just becoming the product you're selling, losing that line between who you are and the image you project. The strategy starts to dictate the soul, essentially.
Okay, so we have the philosophy Me Inc. and the pressure to optimize. Now let's look at the machinery, the actual architecture of how the self-as product gets, well, harvested and exploited, especially online. This takes us into critical theory, right? Why the Frankfurt School?
The Frankfurt School is crucial here because they shifted focus onto how communication and culture maintain systems of power and domination. It's not just about economic force in a factory anymore. It's about how the culture industry, mass media, and now digital media justify and uphold exploitation, often under the banner of freedom or connection. Herbert Marcuse's ideas are particularly relevant for dissecting this.
Especially his distinction between work and labor. How does that help us understand social media?
It's absolutely key. Marcuse defined work as creating use-values things meeting real human needs. Food, shelter, yes, but he specifically included communication, community, culture as forms of essential work. The big distortion, as Christian Fuchs points out, is how social media platforms invert this social essence. Platforms like Facebook, Google, they look like tools for communication for work in Marcuse's sense, but fundamentally they're privately owned advertising giants. For them, exchange value making money completely dominates the use value of connecting people.
So the connecting, the sharing, the community building, that's just the hook. The real product is our attention and data generated by those interactions.
Exactly. The time we spend communicating, sharing, liking, that's productive activity for the platform owner. And this requires constant, intense digital monitoring. Andreevich makes a strong point here. This monitoring isn't passive anymore. It's not just happening by chance, it's purposefully written into the code. Algorithms are designed to track, categorize, predict our behavior.
And he argues that just framing this as a privacy issue misses the point.
That's his critique, yes. Focusing only on confidentiality, who sees my data, overlooks the fundamental exploitative nature of how that data is used commercially. The issue isn't just that they know your preferences, it's that the data generated by your activity, your time, your clicks, your social interactions is instantly captured and treated as the private property of these companies. Your social life becomes raw material, extracted without you getting paid for it.
That sounds an awful lot like classic Marxist exploitation, just in a different setting. Can we actually call this digital labor?
Many theorists argue we absolutely can. David Hesbenhaw offers a working definition of exploitation that fits. One group's well-being depending on another's deprivation, exclusion from the means of production, and the appropriation of their labor. Fuchs builds on this, arguing that all our activity on social media, the likes, shares, comments, even just scrolling time, is a form of surplus value creating and exploiting digital labor. We're producing feedback commodities, these detailed user profiles, which are the real products sold to advertisers, generating huge value for the platform owners.
But the crazy thing is it feels voluntary. Tiziana Terranova nailed this paradox, didn't she? Describing these activities as pleasurably embraced and at the same time often shamelessly exploited.
That pleasure, that feeling of connection or fun, is exactly what masks the exploitation so effectively. Soren Peterson calls it the architecture of exploitation and enclosure. It's not overt coercion, like a factory boss telling you to work faster. It's subtle, built into the platform's design. You're not forced to log in, but not participating can have real social or professional costs. And this whole structure relies on the breakdown of boundaries between our work lives and our leisure time. Marcuse called this the de-differentiation of work and leisure.
Which sounds like Mario Tronti's concept of the social factory, where the logic of the factory extends to all of society.
Precisely. In the social factory model, all social production, including what we do online for fun, for connection, for what Marcuse termed eros, or the pleasure principle, it all gets pulled under the logic of capital. The time you spend watching videos, arguing in comment sections, that's potentially monetizable time. Work and leisure blur completely. And Marcuse warned this leads to the destruction of Eros because if every human activity, every desire can be exploited for profit, where is the space left that's truly free from that pressure? Social media potentially represents the total commodification of our time.
If this system is so total, so encompassing, how does it sustain itself? How do we not reject it? Marcuse talked about ideological mechanisms, didn't he?
He did. Two main ones are really relevant here. The first is technological rationality. This is about how instrumental reason, the logic of efficiency, maximizing measurable results comes to dominate our thinking. It narrows our consciousness down to what's practical, what fits the system. Platforms embody this perfectly. The algorithm isn't asking what's true or what's meaningful. It's asking what maximizes engagement, what keeps people scrolling. That narrow instrumental logic becomes the default way of thinking, making it harder to even imagine alternatives that transcend the system. We internalize the metrics.
And the second mechanism sounds even trickier. Repressive tolerance. The platforms talk a lot about freedom, connection, giving everyone a voice.
But that very rhetoric, Marcuse would argue, masks the underlying reality. They promote tolerance, allowing countless voices, but it's a tolerance that ultimately serves to maintain the system itself. Because the underlying structure, who owns the platform, whose voices get amplified by algorithms, remains deeply unequal. Clay Shirky pointed this out bluntly. Diversity plus freedom of choice creates inequality. So you have the appearance of pluralism, but in reality, powerful monopolies and established hierarchies dominate. The tolerance becomes repressive because it prevents real challenges to the status quo by making dissent feel futile or absorbed.
Okay, this framework, exploitation, digital labor, the social factory, repressive tolerance, it all becomes starkly, almost painfully clear when we look at digital influencers. They seem like the ultimate embodiment of this commodified self.
They really are the frontline workers in this digital social factory. On the surface, they look like entrepreneurs, motivated by authenticity, autonomy, controlling their own lives. But dig deeper, and you see they're often heavily constrained by algorithms, by platform demands, and frequently by their own agents or management companies. Their entire job is influencer marketing, which boils down to selling their authentic private stories, their relationships, their daily lives as commercial products.
And this requires a very specific kind of emotional work, doesn't it? Something that goes beyond what Arlie Hochschild described in her classic work on emotional labor.
It does. Hochschild talked about surface acting, faking emotion, and deep acting, trying to actually feel the required emotion, usually in service jobs. It was about lending your emotions for a wage. Influencers, according to the research we looked at, engage in what's termed dialectical emotional labor. This means they're constantly caught in this intense push and pull, this tension between feelings of emancipation, I'm being authentic, I'm my own boss, and feelings of self-exploitation, I'm monetizing my innermost self, I have to perform authenticity. And the core condition, the really brutal part, is that success requires self-exploitation. They have to blur that line between who they are and the brand they sell.
Let's break down how this actually works in practice. The sources talk about external work practices, things imposed by agents or platforms. The first is systemization. What does that look like?
Systemization is about making emotions fit a commercial schedule and logic. Anne's case from the research is a powerful example. Her agents wanted her to post about a family breakfast, a normal, private moment, that had to be timed and framed specifically to meet commercial goals, to gain much more likes than just a regular post. She had to actively systematize her family's routine to produce this authentic-looking but commercially optimized content. Agents like Nellie might give a general script the main plot, but then tell the influencer to make it her own, which sounds empowering, but actually forces the influencer to internalize the commercial demand and perform spontaneity on cue.
The emotion has to appear real, but its production is tightly managed, which leads right into the second practice, quantification.
If emotion is produced systematically, it also has to be measured. Quantification is where that emotional performance gets translated directly into cold, hard brand metrics. We see agents like Clara talking about influencers purely in terms of CPM cost per mil or cost per 1,000 impressions. This is a standard advertising metric. It takes the messy reality of human connection and emotional resonance and boils it down into a number that brands can buy.
That's technological rationality in action right there, isn't it?
Yeah.
It doesn't care about the quality of the connection, just the quantity of impressions or engagement.
Precisely. The influencer's value isn't judged by meaning, but by measurable efficiency. Can they turn their feelings into likes, into clicks, into conversion rates? That's the language of capital. They essentially have to allow themselves, their personalities, their lives to be engineered to fit these quantifiable logics.
And the third external practice, prodding, seems to be about how agents keep influencers compliant through, well, emotional manipulation.
It's a subtle but powerful form of control. Agents use personalized, effective interactions, not formal emails, but chatty messages, heart emojis, asking about their lives to build rapport and trust. Nellie, the agent in the study, explicitly said she does this so that they feel safe. It creates this feeling of partnership, of being allies. This effective power makes it easier for the agent to then push for more commercialization, deeper intrusions into private life, because the influencer feels supported and understood, even while being guided toward greater self-exploitation. It leverages intimacy for commercial ends. Now, when this external pressure and market logic gets internalized, that's when we see the real internal struggle. The sources identify 4 key internal work practices that show the cost.
Okay, let's start with the first, reasserting boundaries. It sounds positive, like self-protection, but it seems like a losing battle.
It's the constant internal negotiation. How much of myself do I give away? How many sponsored posts are too many? Petra, one influencer, talked about this worry. She consciously limited ads because she didn't want to look like she was only here for the money. She understands authenticity sells, so ironically, she has to resist the pure market impulse to maintain the market value of her authenticity. It's a real catch-22.
But the pressure to share more seems immense, sometimes coming from the audience who feel they deserve access.
That pressure is huge. Caitlyn admitted feeling like she hadn't given enough because the followers want more. This drive to satisfy audience demand for intimacy leads to crossing major personal lines. Think about Jackie posting a sponsored photo of her wedding dress before the wedding, upsetting her fiancé Mitch. A deeply personal moment overridden by brand commitments and follower expectations.
When those boundaries inevitably crumble, we get the second practice, displaying personal pain, turning vulnerability into content.
Yes, this involves adopting that therapeutic narrative style, sharing struggles, breakdowns, anxieties, partly to be relatable and authentic, but ultimately serving the brand. Tina's story is just staggering. She has a genuine emotional crisis on vacation. Her immediate reaction, contact her mentor, a service linked to her sponsor, Mentorgo, and then craft an ironic post about her breakdown, advertising the mentor's service. She's literally performing and monetizing her own suffering, her exhaustion. Vulnerability becomes another asset to be leveraged.
Exploiting the self in the name of authenticity. Okay, the third practice, foregrounding the backstage. This is about bringing sponsors into really private life events.
Exactly. This is where the commercial imperative colonizes deeply personal, often sensitive moments, causing real distress. The research is full of examples. Caitlyn talked about working vacations, being physically present but mentally absent during family time, or even her own birthday because she had sponsor obligations, taking photos, creating content. Private rituals become paid performances.
And the examples around childbirth and marriage are particularly stark, aren't they? Moments you really can't get back.
They really highlight the extent of the self-commodification. Jackie's wedding dress sponsorship clearly caused friction with her partner, and Caitlyn reviewing sponsored birth preparation classes 3 months after giving birth. She explicitly said she waited until she was mentally recovered from the trauma of the birth. Think about that. The profound physical and emotional experience of childbirth had to be scheduled around a content deadline. The pain itself becomes subject to market timing.
Which brings us to the final internal practice, alleviate. This is basically rationalization, justifying the damage.
It's the coping mechanism, often a deeply damaging one, justifying the self-harm as necessary as part of the job. Dan, the party guy, is the most extreme example here. His brand was built around partying and alcohol, yet he was attending Alcoholics Anonymous. He rationalized continuing to promote this lifestyle, telling his agent his job required him to be drunk and party because that was his brand's authenticity. His addiction, his personal struggle, became a necessary component of his professional success, locking him into a destructive cycle where self-sabotage was essential to the brand.
Wow. Looking at these practices laid out, it's a disturbing picture of the private self being eroded. Let's widen the lens now and talk about the broader impact on authenticity, especially creativity. When everything gets filtered through market logic, what happens to, for lack of a better word, the soul?
Isabel Coogan's work speaks directly to this. She argues that when creative expression, art, writing, even just how you present yourself becomes primarily judged by its market value, something essential gets lost. Decisions start being filtered through market consideration. Will this sell? Is this trending? instead of what she calls spiritual necessity. What do I truly need to express? What feels urgent and authentic? Creation shifts from expression to product development.
And this leads to what you might call the tyranny of trends.
Exactly. To stay relevant, especially in algorithm-driven spaces, creators feel pressured to adopt whatever style or format is currently popular. The result is often derivative work, lacking that unique spiritual fingerprint that comes from genuine self-expression. You become an echo, chasing market signals. The real tragedy, the sources suggest, is this gradual erosion of self. Over time, the creator might not even know what their authentic voice is anymore, confusing it with market-conditioned responses. Creative work becomes draining, depleting, instead of energizing. Burnout becomes almost inevitable.
And the digital environment itself seems designed to accelerate this with the addiction to external validation.
Oh, absolutely. Platforms are engineered for it. Likes, shares, comments. It's a constant feedback loop hitting our dopamine receptors. It effectively hijacks the creative impulse. The driving question changes from, is this true to me, to, will people like this? Will this perform well? You start creating for the approval metric. And the paradox is, work created primarily for validation often lacks the very depth and authenticity that generates real, lasting appreciation. It's a hollow pursuit.
And the audience, ironically, can become part of the problem, locking creators into expectations.
Definitely. Once you build an audience around a certain style or topic, you can feel trapped. Evolving, experimenting, taking risks, all things essential for growth, become terrifying because you might alienate the followers who expect consistency. The market often rewards niche growth. So reclaiming authenticity in this environment, the sources suggest, isn't just about finding yourself. It's an act of courage, almost spiritual resistance. It means choosing to create from necessity rather than strategy. So just to kind of wrap this all together for you, the listener, we've traced this arc, haven't we? From the self-seeking some kind of inner impulse away from social roles, like Turner described, to seeing that very impulse captured, measured, and turned into digital labor exploited by platforms, as Marcuse and Fuss analyzed. And this culminates in this really intense dialectical mode for influencers, where self-exploitation isn't a bug in the system, it's the actual engine driving the person brand.
And the practical takeaway here, the relevance for you listening, is really about developing that critical lens. Being able to see when your participation online shifts. When does it move from genuine connection, that initial use value, towards being part of this larger structure of value extraction and self-commodification? Just understanding the difference between, say, simple self-promotion and this deeper structural self-exploitation we've been discussing, that awareness is crucial for navigating the modern economy.
Yeah, absolutely. And looking ahead, thinking about where this research might go, the really profound, maybe unsettling question this deep dive leaves us with is quite existential, given how fused the influencer's identity becomes with their brand, like Dan, whose addiction was his brand, or Tina, selling her exhaustion success, seems to demand the constant chipping away, maybe even the erasure of the private self. So the question is, if the real person has been fundamentally consumed by the demands of the brand, how does that person brand worker ever successfully unbrand? How do they leave the job without facing a potentially devastating identity crisis? What's left?
That idea of structural compromise, of what's left when the brand is gone, that's definitely something to think about. Now, we recognize the irony here. We're asking you to engage, to participate in the very validation economy we've just spent this time dissecting. But maybe the key is that critical distinction. Engaging because you want to connect with the ideas versus engaging because you feel algorithmically compelled. That awareness is what we hope you take away. If you found this discussion valuable, if it sparked some thoughts, please do consider subscribing, liking, or commenting. We genuinely love to hear your insights. Thank you for listening to VSOW.